Welcome back to 2019 after my little detour to 2010 in my last video. As promised, I'm going to talk about Intel's 10nm Ice Lake processor and why most PC users will never see it. To understand this, I'm going to go through a bunch of Intel's roadmaps, and while we're at it, I'm also going to compare Intel and AMD's upcoming processors over the next 2 years. Intel's 10nm fab process has had a really troubled history and has ultimately been delayed by 3 whole years. Intel pretty frankly showed the magnitude of this delay at an investor presentation in May that I borrowed the slide from here. By now, in late 2019, we should have been near the end of 10nm's life and getting ready for 7nm. But instead, Intel is just starting to ship 10nm chips in some volume. This delay has cascaded through Intel's whole business because they designed a bunch of chips for the 10nm process that they couldn't manufacture. For example, Ice Lake was probably finished in 2016 for a planned 2017 release, and then Intel had to basically sit on the design for 2 years. For this whole video, I want to caution you that I've gathered this information from a variety of sources. I'm leaving the dates deliberately vague, and companies don't always deliver what they plan to. I may have even made some errors here and there. A lot of this video is based on an Intel roadmap that was leaked by Dutch site tweakers.net back in April. From the Dell logo in the corner, you can guess where this leak originated. You might be forgiven for saying, "Wes, I see Ice Lake right in the middle of this roadmap. Why do you say that I'm not getting it?" And the roadmap has been accurate so far because Intel announced in July that Ice Lake is officially shipping. Our long national 14nm nightmare is over, right? Not really. There's so much detail here, your eyes can glaze over. Instead of cramming everything into one slide, let's look at each market segment, one at a time. If you're a PC gamer, this part is for you. The mainstream socketed desktop processor. Spoiler, you're never getting Ice Lake or any 10nm processor from Intel. I've put Intel in blue and AMD in red here. AMD publishes official public roadmaps, which is nice, but those official roadmaps are pretty vague when it comes to things like the number of cores. So we know the name of what's coming from AMD, but not what is behind the name. Anyway, it looks like Intel is going to continue their emergency backup plan of rehashing the Skylake core on 14nm, but adding 2 more cores every year. Right now, Intel is selling Coffee Lake Refresh, aka the 9900K and friends. Later this year, they'll get up to 10 cores with Comet Lake, maybe with another 100 MHz bump up to something like 5.1 GHz. It's hard for me to imagine how Comet Lake has a chance against AMD's 12-core and 16-core Ryzen 3000 series that is already starting to ship. In 2021, things get even worse. It looks like Rocket Lake is going to be just Comet Lake with a better GPU, which gamers don't even use. There may even be a few months when Intel will be trying to sell a 14nm processor against AMD's 5nm Zen 4. Maybe off the right side of the screen in 2022, Intel will finally catch up with something like Golden Cove on 7nm. I'm going to talk later about the idea that Intel is skipping 10nm completely in some markets, like the desktop. I also have some speculation about Zen 3, but let's leave that for another video. Let's move up a notch to the high-end desktop, or HEDT market, which is for content creators like video editors and 3D artists. These chips are generally cut-down server chips with fewer cores, fewer memory channels, and fewer PCIe lanes. Intel just announced Cascade Lake X, which is just Skylake X but 200 MHz faster. The big news is that they are getting ripped so hard by AMD that they had to cut the price literally in half, from $2,000 for an 18-core down to $1,000. And that's before AMD launches Threadripper 3000, which may rip even harder. It's very likely that Threadripper 3000 is going to be a cut-down Rome server chip, but there are conflicting rumors about exactly how cut-down it will be. I have no information about what comes after 2020 in the HEDT market. It's safe to assume that AMD will continue to update Threadripper every year. Intel is going to be more constrained because their large dies are expensive to make, but they don't have room to increase prices. Intel could cut down either Cooper Lake or Ice Lake server chips in 2021, but I don't know if they can afford to do that. We might just see a Cascade Lake X refresh instead. Above HEDT is what I'm calling the exotic workstation market, which includes very high-end systems like the new Mac Pro and equivalents from Dell, HP, and the like. Like Ferraris, not many of these are sold, but there's a lot of marketing bragging about them. These are server chips that are not really cut down, they're just rebranded as workstation chips and sold at lower but still high prices. Intel's $3,000 W3175X was kind of an emergency stunt processor, but at least it's only one-third the price of the Xeon Platinum that it's derived from. For the Mac Pro, Intel is repeating the stunt and selling the Xeon W3200 series using the massive server socket with 6 memory channels and 64 lanes of PCIe. On the red side, there are rumors that AMD may release something called the TRX 80 platform, which may be a full ROM server chip with 8 memory channels branded as Threadripper. Looking further out, Apple is willing to pay top dollar for the best technology. Well, not the absolute best, but the best Intel can give them. So one day we may see a workstation chip derived from Ice Lake SP. It's kind of a shame the new 28-core Mac Pro looks obsolete before it even ships. Now let's get back to reality and look at laptops. If you have a 15-inch or larger laptop, you're never getting Ice Lake. Intel just takes their 95-watt desktop chip that we already looked at, sets the TDP to 45 watts, and calls it a mobile edition. So instead of turboing for minutes, it can only turbo for seconds before it overheats and drops back to the base clock. But hey, you're looking at 10 cores in a laptop now. Something that's not on the screen here is that Comet Lake backported the memory controller from Ice Lake, so it can finally support LPDDR4. It's been a weird situation that phones have had LPDDR4 for years, while laptops were stuck with either LPDDR3 or higher power DDR4. I think Apple was pretty unhappy about that situation. Looking at AMD, conceivably, they could have tried to shoehorn their 8-core desktop Zen 2 Matisse into a BGA version for laptops, but instead they're selling the pretty weak quad-core Zen Plus APU, and people are eagerly awaiting Zen 2 in 2020. Hopefully they also include LPDDR4 support. Sadly, AMD's product naming feels a little confusing and maybe misleading, as the desktop Ryzen 3000 is Zen 2, while the mobile Ryzen 3000 APUs are based on the older Zen Plus architecture. Like endless GPU rebranding, if they got away with it once, they'll probably keep doing it. These processors all include integrated graphics, but I'm not going to discuss it because larger laptops generally have a discrete GPU. Things get more interesting when we move down to the 13-inch laptop market. I know you see Ice Lake right there, but don't get too excited because Intel has decided to compete against themselves by releasing not one, but 2 different processors under the 10th generation U-Class brand. Ice Lake is the new hotness, or I should say new coolness because it's more power efficient, with a much improved integrated GPU and increased IPC, but it only has 4 cores. Comet Lake U is another rebrand of Skylake, but now has 6 cores instead of 4 in Whiskey Lake. I guess if you can fit 10 cores and 45 watts, then it makes sense to put 6 cores and 35 watts. I haven't said much about model numbers in this video, because usually I think all model numbers are stupid in their own way, and I try not to let it bother me. Ice Lake model numbers start with 10 for 10th generation, and they have a G in there somewhere. Comet Lake model numbers also start with 10, but have no G. That's how you know what you're buying. I haven't seen any head-to-head reviews yet, so it'll be really interesting to see which processor is faster for different workloads. Most 13-inch laptops use integrated graphics, so Ice Lake's better GPU could be a noticeable advantage. I also suspect that Ice Lake costs more to make since the 10nm process is so problematic, which puts Intel into a situation where their more expensive processor looks like it has worse specs. As we'll see later, Intel is trying to smooth over these differences with a bunch of marketing buzzwords, so maybe nobody will notice. This bifurcation is projected to continue into 2021, where 14nm Rocket Lake will compete against 10nm Tiger Lake, and it sounds like they will both use the same Gen 12 GPU, now branded as Z. AMD has the same lineup of processors for all laptops, they just have some models with lower TDP for smaller laptops. A power-efficient 6-core Renoir on 7nm with Vega 2 GPU could potentially do really well here. Now that we've seen the roadmaps, what's the verdict for Ice Lake and Intel's 10nm process? It looks like Intel is planning to ship mostly 14 nanometer and very few 10 nanometer processors over the next few years, which brings me to an article from a year ago, where Charlie from Semi-Accurate reported that Intel was skipping 10 nanometer and trying to jump ahead to 7 nanometer. Intel usually doesn't comment on rumors, but they officially denied it, and Charlie later apologized for being only semi-accurate. What we see now is that Intel has not killed off 10 nanometer completely, but they are only going to use it for a few products. I've been preparing this video for a while, but I got delayed due to escaping my job, moving, and going on vacation. Now all these chips have been officially released, so instead of squinting at roadmaps, we should be able to find public information. Here's how Intel helps you decide between Ice Lake and Comet Lake. Did you realize that comets are made of ice? Think about it. With 6 cores, Comet Lake is a productivity powerhouse. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Ice Lake, on the other hand, is bringing AI to the PC at scale. I'm going to be kind and just say I have no idea what that means. But who uses computers for work anymore? Let's look at entertainment. Comet Lake is immersive, while Ice Lake is a generational leap. Which one is better? If I knew, I'd be in marketing. Fortunately, they both have the same Wi-Fi and Thunderbolt, so we don't have to worry about that part. Realistically, us customers aren't really going to be choosing. PC makers will decide for us which processor to use. So let's go shopping for laptops. Here's the new XPS 13 from Dell, not to be confused with the old XPS 13. At the bottom, you can see it has up to a 10th generation, and the model number has no G, so this is Comet Lake. I looked it up so you don't have to, and this is the highest end 6-core model. So Dell didn't skimp on the productivity. Good job. Let's head over to Lenovo, where I got sucked in by the X1 Carbon Gen 7. Carbon sure is bad for the environment, but it makes a beautiful laptop. Interestingly, they offer a mix of 8th gen and 10th gen processors here, but again, there's no Ice Lake. Disappointingly, they only have a quad-core Comet Lake. Hey Lenovo, if Dell can fit the 6-core into a 13-inch laptop, why does your 14-inch only have 4 cores? Where's my productivity? Finally, there's the new Razer Blade Stealth 13. Can you really call it stealth if it's white? With a name like Razer Blade Stealth, I want it to be coated in Vanna Black, and so sharp that I cut myself when I opened the lid. But I digress. We have found Ice Lake. It exists. Let the generational leap begin. In fairness, I found some articles listing a few more Ice Lake laptops, but they seem to be mostly 2-in-1s. I guess it makes a certain kind of sense that people who want to put their fingers all over their screen while their laptop does yoga are also interested in bringing AI to the PC at scale, while people who care about productivity just want an old-fashioned laptop. So I'm not getting Ice Lake, and you probably aren't either, but maybe that's all for the best. And the bazillion dollars that Intel spent on a 10 nanometer process that isn't that great, we'll call it a learning experience. Just like my analysis of Zen 2 and 3 that's coming up on the channel later.